G'day guys, Seeney here and welcome to another episode on the Australian Wealth channel. And today we're going to be going step by step through the process of what you actually need to do to purchase a property. So thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Before we get started, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. So, you want to buy yourself a property. Now, this is something which is a goal for very many people, not only in Australia, but across the entire world. And when you're first starting, it can seem quite difficult to do. But I'm going to step you through the process, and hopefully this is going to provide some clarity for you as to how the whole process happens from the start to the end. So the first thing when it comes to buying property, particularly in Australia, is to be rich. Now, of course, I'm joking. I know it's not very helpful, but what I do mean is that you need to make sure that you have saved up a reasonable deposit. So this is the first step when you're looking at buying a property, especially if it's your first one. There's no other ways that you can really get around it other than putting your own money down. So thankfully, this has changed over time. You used to only be able to put 20% or more down. Of course, as property prices have increased over time, there's a lot of different schemes that are going on where it's a lot easier to get in with less money. So now you can actually get into a property with 10% deposit instead of a 20% deposit, and in some cases the government has reduced it for some people down to a 5% deposit. So the really important thing to note if you're putting less money down is that you're actually going to be paying more interest, because obviously if you put less money down, it means that you're borrowing more money. And that means that you're going to be paying interest on more money. So that's something that's really important to take into account. If you're putting 20% down, then obviously you're going to be paying a fair bit less interest because you borrowed less money. So 20% down, less interest. However, if you're putting 10% down, it's not only just more interest that you're going to be paying, but you're also going to be paying what's called lender's mortgage insurance. Now, this is a percentage of the amount of money that you are borrowing. This is, of course, to protect the lender in case of a default, so we don't have a situation like we saw, especially in the States, in 2007, 2008, 2009, where basically everyone was foreclosed on and property prices went through the floor and we nearly crushed the financial system. So this exists as insurance to protect the lender. It does not protect you. So that is something to keep in mind. So of course, there's pros and cons to using 10 and 20%. By saving 10%, you might be able to get into the market a little bit faster. However, you have a little bit less in the way of payments in the long run if you're putting 20% down. So the next thing, you'll probably need about 70,000 to about 250,000, depending on your market and depending on how much money you are putting down. So this will also cover your stamp duty and any other costs that are involved with transferring the property. So things like conveyancing, which we'll talk about very shortly. The government has created some schemes which make it a little bit easier for first home buyers to get into the market, so they have a little bit more of an advantage. So one of these things is the first homeowners grant. So the government will throw in $10,000 for you on a property valued up to $750,000. So if you're in Sydney, forget it. If you're in Melbourne, forget it. But if you're in a place such as Brisbane or somewhere a bit more regionally, then this is something that could be quite helpful to you. This, however, cuts off at $450,000 for vacant land. So if you're purchasing any land that's worth more than $450,000, then you will not get that stamp duty reduction or the first homeowners grant. Now, the next step before you even start looking at properties is to go and speak to a mortgage broker. Now, I think mortgage brokers are fantastic because they have access to a lot of different lenders. They basically collate all of the different lenders that can give you money for your property, and they'll bring the best deal for you, because the best deal for an investor might be different to the first home buyer. So they're going to be able to collate that and make sure it's tailored for you. So you need to work out what your borrowing power is, and that gives you a rough budget of what you can afford to buy here in Australia. So a mortgage broker will need a few things. They'll need your tax returns or your group certificate if you're an employee. They'll also need your bank statements and information on credit cards, all of those different things that are related to your finances. Now, of course, lenders vary. In the case of ANZ, they will take 1 year's tax returns. Most banks, if you're self-employed, you will need at least 2 years tax returns. But some are more flexible, some are less flexible. So that's something to keep in mind. Initially, running my business, we had great income for the past year. So we opted to use the 1 year's tax returns with ANZ. Rather than use the 2, because the previous one was going to draw down our borrowing power. So, it's about trying to work out how you can get what you want and still being able to service the debt that you're going to take on. So in regards to credit cards, if you're looking to buy a home and you don't have a high income, you just need to get rid of it. Basically, this is a piece of information which I think people find incredibly valuable. But for every $10,000 of credit card limit, it's going to reduce your borrowing power by $50,000. So if you just have a credit card with $20,000 limit on it, even if it's not used, your borrowing power just got chopped by $100,000. So you need to keep that in mind. You can just imagine what that would be like if you have a large credit limit of like 50,000 plus. It's going to reduce your borrowing power so far. So if you have a lower income, then just get rid of the credit card completely. So remember not to go in over your head. You need to have a reasonable income to show that you can actually service the debt and you're not going to go into arrears. So ideally, your mortgage payment should be a maximum of 25% of your monthly income. So this is not always possible in places like Sydney or Melbourne because housing is very expensive, but it's a good rule of thumb to be not house poor, because the last thing you want to be doing is living in a house and you have no money to spend on anything else because all of the money is going into your mortgage payments and interest into the bank because you bought something that is just too much for you to handle. So 25% is a really good rule of thumb. If you can get it less than that, even better. But of course, not always possible in Sydney and Melbourne. So after the mortgage broker has spoken to the banks or the lenders and they've worked out how much borrowing power you have, then you'll go to the pre-approval stage. So this is basically where a lender will say, okay, we've seen what your income is. We're going to be able to offer you this much money. This is the amount of money that you can borrow. So this is going to be very different for everyone. If you have a household income with your partner and you're earning $100,000, you're going to be able to borrow a lot less than someone that has a household income of $300,000. So this will give you your guide so you'll know exactly how much you can borrow, and that way you can start to go shopping. There's a few different things that you want to consider when you're looking to buy a home. So the first thing is, is this going to be an investment or is this going to be a place to live in? Depending on which one of these you are, then, obviously you have to tailor for this. If you're investing, you need to look at a lot of different trends such as government infrastructure that's going into the area, population growth, all that. But when it comes to your home, it needs to be an area that you want to live in and you really like to live in. I think that's very important. In terms of that, quality of life for me is important, so I don't mind paying a bit of a premium to live somewhere that is fantastic. So once you've worked out an area that you want to live in, the next thing is to have a look at some of the properties in the area. So whether you're going to be buying an existing property or you're going to buy some land and build, the processes are slightly different for that. If you're looking at an existing property, before you put in an offer, it's really important to make sure that you have a professional building inspector go in and actually have a look at what you are buying. So this means checking for foundational problems, structural problems, and also if there's any termite damage, things like that, so they can actually give you a decent report on what's actually wrong with the property, so you're not going in and buying a lemon. You could just imagine how heartbreaking it would be if you go and drop like $800,000 on a property and you find out that you're going to have to knock half the thing down because it's not structurally safe. That's a mistake that you definitely do not want to do. So make sure you get yourself a good building inspector that can go through and have a look at the entire property before you put an offer down. Obviously, if you're building, you're not going to have to worry about any pest reports or building inspections or anything like that because you're building it from the ground up. Now, at this stage, if that's all good, you can put an offer down on the property. So sometimes there'll be a bit of a price guide, sometimes it'll just be an auction. There's a lot of different ways that you can actually go through and put in an offer on a property. But the important thing is that when the offer is accepted, it moves on to the next stage. After this stage, this is where contracts are drawn up. So the bank will go and do their own valuation of the property, and the bank valuations tend to be a little bit more conservative than what you would actually get on the real estate market to protect themselves. And if the bank is happy, that means that the bank will give you formal approval. And what this means is that they are 100% guaranteed to put the money down. Pre-approval obviously has conditions attached, like what the valuation of the property is. If the bank thinks the property is worth $300,000 and you're paying $1.8 million, they're probably not going to give you the money for that. But when you get to formal approval and they say, yes, you have formal approval, then this is the point where you actually are going to be able to get the money to buy the property. The only thing you would have to do at that point is make sure that you put your deposit down. At this point, you need to make sure that you have a qualified conveyancer that is looking over the contract that is given to you. So the thing is, a lot of legal jargon is in these contracts, can be very difficult to understand, even if you are really well read, because it's very specific to the legal field. So obviously you want to have someone that's in that profession, have a very good look over this so they can explain to you any of your obligations in plain English. That part is absolutely crucial. There might be a number of different things that are attached to the property that you need to be made aware about, so that you completely understand your obligations. So conveyancing will cost about $700 to $1,500 depending on where you are and the conveyancer that you are using. This is another cost that you need to factor in. Now, remember, you are not legally bound to a property until contracts are signed and exchanged. Okay, so you are not legally bound until contracts are signed and exchanged. And then at that point, you are legally bound to the property. Sometimes, and in a lot of contracts actually, there is a cooling off period where you have maybe 3 or 4 days, you might have a week where you can actually back out of the deal. You might have to pay some fees because of that, but after that cooling off period, it's a done deal. So generally between the exchange of contracts and settlement, there's roughly about 6 weeks. So settlement is the point where the property is transferred from the vendor, which is the seller, to you or the purchaser. So during this 6 weeks, it's really important to make sure that you have everything in order in relation to the property. So if you're buying an existing property, it's a stipulation of many lenders that you actually have home insurance. So this means that you'll need to take out a policy with many of the different providers so that if something terrible happens to the property, it means that you're protected and the bank is also protected. Many banks will not give you the money for construction if you're building a house unless you have home insurance. At settlement, your solicitor, the bank, and the vendor will get together either in person or over the internet, and the property will be transferred into your name. Something really important to note with the settlement of the property is that stamp duty is also paid at the transfer of the property. So this isn't something that you can go and pay a little bit later. No, you need to have the money for stamp duty ready to go as part of the settlement of the property. So that is the process of purchasing a property. It's pretty much the same all around the world, but this is the process particularly for Australia. So I hope that you found this video really valuable, going through the step-by-step of what it actually, what is the process of going through and buying a property. So I hope you enjoyed this video about going through the process of what to do when you're buying a property. There's many steps, it takes a long period of time, but hopefully this sheds a little bit of light on the process for you. So please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps to get these videos out to more people. So my name is Seeney, and we'll see you later.